Okay, let's dive into something truly fascinating today. We have an incredible source,
Hmm.
a collection of letters, mostly written by Alice Chipman Dewey, the wife of the philosopher John Dewey.
Right, the famous John Dewey.
Exactly. And these letters cover their big trip through Japan and China right around 1919, 1920. Their daughter, Evelyn, actually edited them later.
And what's great is these aren't like formal essays or anything. They're personal letters home.
Yeah.
So you get this amazing kind of unfiltered look at East Asia during a really, really pivotal time.
Unfiltered is the word. The immediate feelings, the day-to-day stuff mixed right in with their thoughts on culture, society, politics.
Yeah, the political undercurrents they picked up on are pretty interesting.
So our mission, you could say, for this deep dive is to really unpack these letters. We want to pull out the key insights, the things that surprise them, those little details that paint a picture of Japan and China almost a century ago.
All through their eyes as these, well, very sharp American observers.
And that personal view is crucial, isn't it? It's their experience.
Totally. Which means it's super insightful, but also, shaped by where they came from. That's part of the richness, I think.
Absolutely. And we'll follow their journey, Japan, then China, looking at the contrasts, the connections they saw. It's like traveling with them.
It really throws the differences that struck them into sharp relief.
Okay, so let's start where they did. Arrival in Japan. Tokyo, specifically. Alice talks about this sensory overload on the streets.
Right, the shops everywhere, the hats. She mentions the variety of men's hats.
Yeah, she'd never seen anything like it. And the muddy streets. That comes up.
And the rickshaw men get quite a bit of description. She calls them lithe, mentions their steel spring legs.
But it wasn't just admiration, was it? There was unease there, too.
Oh, yeah. A real discomfort. She uses the word fear, actually, about the pain of being drawn by a fellow being. It feels very honest.
That really jumps out. But then, amidst all this newness, she finds things surprisingly easy, especially shopping.
I know, right? She was genuinely amazed by how much English was spoken and how good it was. Said it made department stores easier than back home.
Which is quite something for 1919.
Definitely. And they ran into unique customs, like getting those little cloth covers for their shoes in stores.
The feet gloves. She joked Chicago needed them.
Uh-huh. And trying on clogs was apparently a whole event.
But the main thing seems to be the hospitality. They were just, well, overwhelmed by it.
Completely. Alice writes about nonstop invitations, people guiding them everywhere, feeling like they'd spend the rest of their lives just trying to repay the kindness.
It paints this picture of incredible formal politeness, but also genuine warmth towards visitors.
And they start picking up on the social structures, the
Yeah.
formality, yeah, but also things that seemed really modern to them.
Like the kids at the women's university not bowing to visitors. Alice called that ultra-modern.
Yeah. And meeting people who embodied tradition, like a Confucian gentleman university president, right alongside, say, a very modern young woman from an old aristocratic family.
It's those contrasts. And I love the tiny details, like mistaking the macaroni seller's call.
Oh, the whistle. She thought it was a bank messenger.
Exactly. It just shows how everything, even sounds, was completely new and needed interpretation.
Perfectly captures that feeling of being somewhere totally different.
So, moving past those first impressions, they really start digging into Japanese culture, daily life. The letters mention holidays, sure, but also deeper things they encountered.
Like meetings about universal suffrage, the push for democracy.
And there's a pretty sharp comment about the emperor being indisposed for some big event.
Right. Alice speculates, quite frankly, really, that his health issues were basically managed by the ministers
Right.
and mistresses.
Wow.
Yeah, her words were, as near as we can make out. It shows where they thought the real power was, even if it's just their perception.
And they really got into the arts and aesthetics. Alice's descriptions are fantastic. She talks about the tea ceremony gaining popularity again.
And they attended one that was combined with this huge dinner. She felt it showed both the magnificence of the new rich and the taste of old Japan.
That blend again.
And get this, the price for an old Chinese teacup at an auction, 160,000 yen.
Which was how much back then?
They figured $80,000 in 1919.
Incredible. What does that say about the value placed on history, maybe status?
Exactly. It's more than just a cup. It's a statement about cultural value. Maybe new money wanting old prestige speaks volumes.
The gardens, too. She describes the blooming trees, plums, camellias, cherries beautifully, appreciates the classic beauty of those simple gardens, with old stones, clipped shrubs, creating these little worlds.
But then the Imperial Garden surprised her.
Right, because they had this huge open lawn, this large expanse of grass. Not what she was expecting from Japanese garden design.
Theater was obviously a big deal for them. Kabuki, they saw that.
Sitting on the floor, hours long, meals served right there. Sounds intense.
Total immersion, yeah. And she points out the contrast. The stage itself was pretty plain, but the costumes were incredibly elaborate and costly.
And real samurai garments, not fakes. She said it made the stage a beautiful spectacle.
They also saw no drama. In a barn-like place, she said, more focused on masks, costumes, subtle movement.
She called it an acquired taste,
Ooh.
but was really struck by one actor, Gunjiro, his movements and masks.
And the Dolls Festival, that gives another fascinating cultural window.
Yeah, she saw the dolls not just as toys, but as art, symbols of national life, sometimes centuries-old family treasures.
And she notes how delighted the little girls were, but makes a point of contrasting these historical objects with typical American dolls. It's about how culture gets embedded in objects.
And food, it's a constant theme, isn't it?
Always. From simple stuff like making toast over a charcoal hibachi,
Away.
like a little portable charcoal heater,
Okay.
to formal breakfast ceremonies, even a vegetarian Buddhist lunch she called most exquisite.
They seem pretty adventurous. Trying specialized places for beef, raw fish.
Raw chicken, abalone, shellfish. She even tried tackling lobster with chopsticks.
Brave.
And she gives this really detailed breakdown of one specific tea dinner, course after course. Raw fish, baked fish, sour salad, rice at the very end, which is traditional,
Right.
and the tea. Uji tea she described as strong to the danger point, but with a unique flavor. You really get a taste for it, excuse the pun.
Then there's education. They visited the women's university, saw the practice school.
Little kids in bright kimonos learning Chinese characters.
Yeah.
She noted how industrious they were.
And this leads to thoughts on physical culture. It wasn't just gym class.
No, flower arranging, ancient etiquette. She saw those as demanding real physical control and precision.
And she contrasts the movements of older women doing samurai sword and spear exercises, powerful, graceful, with modern gym exercises, which she thought looked kind of pitiful. Yeah. And judo, too. She watched it, noted the focus on conscious control, the physical results like small waists from breathing techniques, the big forearms.
And she connects it straight back to Zen and samurai teachings. Even recommends a book, The Fighting Spirit of Japan. They were definitely looking for the deeper cultural meanings.
Socially, that universal politeness keeps coming up.
It does. But here's an interesting observation she makes. When Japanese people spoke English, they seemed different.
How so?
Less reserved, maybe. More sociable, like the Japanese students they'd known back in the States. As if switching languages shifted their persona slightly.
Fascinating psychological note. And then there's that very specific seasonal detail.
The cherry blossoms and the drinking.
Yeah, the streets are full of people, too full of sake, she writes. They hadn't seen that until the blossoms came out.
Grounds it right in that specific moment. And little personal things, too, like John Dewey getting a railway pass.
A big deal from the Minister of the Interior.
But Alice being told explicitly, nope, could not be extended to a woman.
Oof. A reminder of the times, even amidst all the courtesy.
Exactly. And her own little moments dropping toast on the super clean floor and the maid just giggling.
Or trying out phrasebook Japanese and the maids reacting. It makes the whole exchange feel very humorous even.
Even shopkeepers giving them gifts, just as hospitable courtesy. It completes the picture.
These details really make the history feel alive, don't they? Not just dates and facts.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift a bit now to the political side of things they observed in Japan. Alice seemed to sense this tension.
Yeah, between a kind of growing liberal desire for more democracy and the really powerful conservative establishment, the bureaucrats, the militarists. She says they, of course, are still very strong.
And she links this internal struggle to the outside world.
Right. She felt that how other countries behaved, especially our own, meaning the U.S., would impact whether democracy progressed in Japan. If others didn't live up to their ideals, it just helped the conservatives.
And they noticed a specific campaign.
The Great Anti-American Drive, yeah. She thought it was mostly in the newspapers, maybe artificially stimulated by the military faction.
Why? What was the thinking?
Her take was it was about Japan losing prestige internationally and needing a way to come back, maybe find a scapegoat or rally support.
Which connects to the discussions they heard about race discrimination directed at the U.S.
But here's the sharp observation Alice makes. The irony. While Japan was criticizing the U.S., it had its own pretty strict prohibitions against Chinese and Korean immigration.
Ah, so a political inconsistency, she called it.
Exactly, highlighting how complex and sometimes, well, hypocritical these national arguments can be.
They also touched on foreign relations stuff, the Anglo-Japanese treaty potentially ending.
And the idea that the U.S. might get blamed, even if it was more Britain's doing. She remembered a previous anti-British drive and talked about Japan feeling kind of isolated internationally after WWI, with Germany and Russia out of the power game.
The situation in Korea comes up too, the independence movement there.
And they hear connections being made between missionary schools and the agitation. Alice found the missionaries in Japan were actually divided about it.
How so?
Some were critical of the missionaries in Korea. Others thought the unrest showed Christian ideas were actually taking root and changing things.
There was that rumor about the ex-emperor of Korea.
Yeah, potentially suicide to stop his son marrying a Japanese princess. She includes it as the kind of political gossip floating around, whether true or not.
The fact they were actually having dinner with members of the House of Peers, the cabinet.
Receiving gifts like dolls from imperial princesses.
It shows the incredible access they had. People clearly trusted them.
Definitely. Though Alice still had her observations. Like watching young aristocratic kids, they were being raised to be so civilized. She wondered if some families might crack under the strain of maintaining that perfect image.
And then that glimpse of the emperor himself, almost mundane.
Right. Just on his way to a school ceremony. She notes the crowd was quiet, respectful, but none of the crazy rumored stuff, cleared streets, sand thrown down.
It wasn't the huge spectacle they might have expected.
Kind of pulls back the curtain a bit, doesn't it? Even for Emperor.
Totally. And speaking of pulling back curtains, the shift to China sounds like it was immediate and, well, dramatic.
Oh, yeah. According to Alice's letters, the contrast hit them right away.
From Japan, which felt so formal, attentive, and highly civilized, to China, which struck them initially as
noisy, easygoing, dirty. That was the first impression.
But the people seemed different, too.
Physically bigger, she notes, often very handsome. And she was really struck by how many laborers looked not just smart, but intellectual.
That's an interesting distinction. They quote that saying.
The East economizes space and the West time.
And they felt that really captured the difference between the two places.
Seems like it resonated with their experience, yeah.
Socially, Alice thought the Chinese seemed more approachable, maybe.
More sociable when you got the chance, especially compared to the formality she felt in Japan when people spoke Japanese. She also mentions singing girls in restaurants, not dancers, but notes it was an old custom the younger generation wanted gone.
And this leads them straight into some pretty blunt thoughts on Chinese society, particularly governance.
Yeah, Blunt is right. They perceived universal political corruption and lack of public spirit just everywhere.
And Alice makes a really significant connection here.
She does. She explicitly links that widespread corruption to the condition of women in China. Very direct.
How did she contrast that with Japan?
She saw Japan's corruption as more organized, contained within certain circles, maybe not permeating everything like she felt it did in China.
And the whole idea of China being in a republic at that point.
They saw it as a joke, basically. Power and the chance to loot just passed between different factions, not a real revolution in their eyes.
And the status of women comes up again.
She observed the reality. Small-footed women cooking, wealthy women gambling their time away. But also signs of change, like a statesman's daughter offering a prize for an essay against having multiple wives, which was still common among the rich.
And another key contrast with Japan.
Right. Remember how women were totally barred from political meetings in Japan?
Yeah.
Well, in Peking, they saw women actually on a protest committee. For Alice, this visible participation seemed linked to that idea of public spirit, or the lack thereof being tied to women's restricted roles.
They also noted a sense of decay, official neglect.
A really striking image is the old examination halls in Nanking being torn down, 25,000 tiny cells where scholars took exams and the bricks just being sold off.
Wow.
Alice saw that as showing how materials were valued over people or intellectual history.
And temples seemed neglected, dusty, unlike in Japan.
Yeah, a stark contrast. Officials, priests, the army, she lumps them together as idol classes.
But then, amidst this sense of stagnation, there's this explosion of activity.
The student movement. This becomes a huge focus in the letters from China. It sounds incredibly dynamic.
Alice details all these protests, strikes. Why were they happening?
triggered by things like politicians voting themselves pay raises while cutting education funds. Students were rioting, demanding parliament dissolve, protesting arrests of speakers.
And the government reaction.
Arrests, yeah. Turning the university into a makeshift prison, basically, surrounded by soldiers.
But the students didn't back down.
No. This is key. They chose to stay in jail, demanding free speech. And it worked. They actually negotiated their release successfully.
Amazing.
Alice mentions the police seemed genuinely surprised by their determination. Teachers got involved, some supportive. They saw girls from American mission schools marching.
Wow.
Students even tried to persuade the soldiers guarding them while they were all stuck in jail together.
And this wasn't just students in isolation, right?
Right. No, they saw links to merchant strikes in Shanghai and Peking, a kind of unexpected alliance across society. Alice felt public opinion was actually making a difference, even though the government itself seemed like a farce.
There were political games too, though.
Oh, yeah. Attempts by the militarist Anfu Club to keep a liberal university chancellor out, making up stories about riots. The usual political maneuvering.
What about education more broadly? Any observations there?
Some challenges. Students returning from abroad, Japan versus America having trouble finding jobs if they weren't willing to start at the bottom, and the traditional classical education. Alice felt it left students helpless, practically.
But was there any hope seen?
Yes, and a proposed industrial education plan, taking apprentices, teaching new methods. They thought that, combined with interest from merchants and guilds, could be a real awakening for China, especially given its industrial lag behind Japan.
They also visited historical sites, like the Nanking Wall.
Huge wall. And those examination halls, again, she described the tiny cells, the grueling schedule, temples noted again for being dusty.
And the Western Hills near Peking.
Yeah, including that famous marble boat structure, which Alice just calls a theatrical fake. No punches pulled.
Huh. And the museum in Peking.
Housed in old palace buildings, full of treasures, barbaric splendor, she calls it. But she wonders about the cost, and if control was maintained by fear.
And her take on Chinese art.
Quite different from Western art. She describes it as childlike, loving bright colors, patterns, more interested in telling a story or being humorous than strict realism.
So China really presented this complicated mix. Deep problems, but also this sudden, vibrant energy.
Exactly. A place of contradictions.
Okay, let's look at everyday life in China through their letters. Transportation comes up.
Rickshaws, sedan chairs in the narrow streets. And she notes the rickshaw pullers actually have to pay the city a fee just to work.
Housing was different from Japan, too?
Totally. Built right on the ground, so courtyards flooded in rain, walls got damp, but Chinese friends apparently didn't seem bothered by it.
And the money system.
Oh, yeah. A nightmare for foreigners. Super complicated, different types of currency.
What other little details caught her eye?
Seeing boards being sawn by hand everywhere, spitting as a common accomplishment. Women and kids traveling with their amas, their nannies, men taking their caged birds out for walks.
Walking birds.
Apparently so. And she mentions eggs being surprisingly cheap.
Random, but vivid.
And street vendors selling cooked food everywhere, which leads us back to meals.
Of course. What were Chinese meals like?
Elaborate. Eating more than one can remember, she says. Specific table layouts. No dancing, singing girls at the places they went, unlike some mentioned earlier.
Any specific dishes stand out?
Almond paste cakes. Fish stomach soup sounds adventurous. Rice pudding with almond sauce. A warning about raw fish there. Unlike Japan, sour cucumber and lobster salad. Tiny portions served, and the hostess serving you was the ultimate compliment. Tea poured multiple times.
And Peking duck gets a mention.
It does. And this fun idea that maybe donuts came from China, based on some fried bread they had? Probably not, but it's a fun thought.
Okay, shifting to the international view from China, anti-Japanese feeling was strong.
Very strong. Alice writes that intelligent Chinese people seem to be pinning their hopes on a war between the U.S. and Japan to sort things out for China.
And she thought that was unrealistic.
Yeah, she predicted a revulsion when they realized the U.S. wasn't going to war just for China's sake.
They also discuss Japan's role in China's internal politics.
The perception that Japan was deliberately keeping the Chinese government weak to avoid having to return Shantung province after WWI.
And they heard stories from people coming back from Siberia.
Yeah, YMCA, Red Cross workers. There are accounts of foreign soldiers there. Apparently, the Japanese soldiers were really disliked. The Chinese ones seen more positively.
Any other international rumors?
Japan denying a secret treaty with Germany. Alice wonders if there was some truth to preliminaries, though. and mentions a Japanese scheme that got China into WWI via Russia.
And those big Rockefeller buildings in Peking.
Seen as monuments blending splendor with modern purpose. But Alice notes the irony. They apparently overshadowed the biggest Japanese hospital and school nearby, causing the Japanese some humiliation. A little architectural rivalry.
So coming back to comparing the national characters, she had that metaphor.
Japanese energy like mercury, quick to react, and Chinese inertia like cotton wool, slower to respond.
Yeah, but then she adds another perspective.
Right, from a Chinese school principal who argued that Chinese conservatism was actually deliberate and intellectual.
Yeah.
His point was, when China does decide to change, it'll be much more fundamental than Japan's changes.
Interesting thought. And politeness again.
Chinese politeness seemed to have less manner, maybe felt more natural than Japanese formality, although she admits this wasn't universal.
So as they wrap up their journey, what are the main reflections? There's a strong sense of change coming, right?
Definitely. Despite everyone thinking China was stagnant, Alice felt it was like a kaleidoscope on the verge of huge social shifts. She saw that student and merchant movement as potentially the real awakening. And Japan, too.
She draws a parallel, yeah. Suggests Japan was also in a state of mental readiness for change, similar to how it was maybe 50 years before. So maybe big shifts coming there, too.
And enduring qualities. What did she see in the Chinese character?
A fundamental nobility, she felt. Said they were deserving of race equality, despite all the corruption and problems she saw. She noted their resilience, how patiently they put up with graft, and also mentions the deep appreciation for old literature, the beauty of writing the characters.
On a completely different note, she connects deforestation and floods.
And suggests a law. Everyone has to plant a tree for their coffin, plus one extra before they die. Very practical, if slightly morbid.
Huh. And then there's that really unexpected insight.
The interest among educated ex-politician Chinese men in psychical research, spirits, divination.
Yeah. Seeing China as the aboriginal home of ghosts. And it wasn't dismissed as superstition, but treated as a serious intellectual topic by these guys.
Fascinating glimpse into a different intellectual world. And one last diplomatic anecdote.
About the Japanese minister. Yeah, who apparently misled his government in Tokyo about signing a treaty because he thought only the government's agreement mattered, completely misjudging the rising power of public opinion in China. It stopped the treaty. Shows how things were already shifting.
Wow. These letters really cover so much ground, don't they? From, like, the taste of tea and the feel of a muddy street, all the way to massive political movements and global dynamics.
They really do. It's that personal lens on huge historical moments. You get a feel for what it was like being there, watching these immense societies grapple with tradition, modernity, their place in the world.
So if we pull it all together, you have these observations of societies on the edge of potentially massive change, dealing with old traditions, new pressures, and these really distinct national characters as the Deweys perceive them.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Thinking about change today, what really drives it? Is it always the big institutions, the governments?
Or could it be something less obvious, like those student protests, the merchant strikes? Maybe just shifts in how ordinary people see things, driven by their own experiences.
Yeah.
Could that be what actually reshapes a nation in the end?
Something to think about, perhaps, as you look at the world around us now.